Hello everyone and welcome to the next review. Today's review is going to be for Karen Armstrong's Sacred Nature. Now, of course, this is a subject that is very close to my heart, perhaps the most important subject, Earth-centered sacrality. But for those of you that have seen my recent comment, I'm trying to make my review shorter, so I will attempt to get the key messages across. Over the past 4 years, I've become more and more sympathetic to religious traditions. However, I should say I don't feel that God is necessary for viewing this earth as sacred. Again, as Hepburn says, we shouldn't see non-human persons or any object in the world as filtering the perfections of deity, and I hold that view. But I wanted to read this book because it's, for a couple of reasons. It's written by Karen Armstrong, a religious scholar, so I wanted to see what she says about sacred nature. But what's interesting about this book in particular is that I specifically chose it because it is more of a practical book. At the end of each chapter, there is a section called The Way Forward, in which Karen will give guidance on how we might better perceive the sacredness of the earth. So it's a book for a wider and more general audience. So to start off with, I was actually pleasantly surprised by the stance that Karen takes here. Instead of talking about a transcendent God and really even beginning from God as this divinity that we should praise first and foremost, she actually invokes the Romantics, people like Wordsworth and Blake, in her introduction. She talks about her distance from nature. So I was actually pleasantly surprised by that. As also, she mentions people like David Abram. She includes a passage from his book Spell of the Sensuous, in which he is sitting in a cave watching a spider weave its web, and thinks that all beings have their own agency, their own power. So that was actually that's a good place to start off from. Again, seeing the intrinsic value of each being. It's the perspective of relational that we should hold to, and I've recently talked quite at length about that. And Karen's main point in the introduction is that our perception of God, the divine, whatever this may be, has become more remote. She argues that in the Enlightenment, people like Bacon and Descartes, they really changed the perception of God. Whereas someone like Thomas Aquinas saw God as being itself, Bacon and Descartes saw God as being a magnified vision of the human scientist, essentially. And over time, we have become less and less attached from God and placed him in the heavens as opposed to the earth. So the key point of this book, throughout multiple chapters, is that sacredness is inherent in the earth. This book is very much focused on Eastern traditions. And for that reason, she talks about these different life forces, these different concepts, perceptions, things like the Tao, Qi, Brahman, Rata. The book is very much focused, in fact, on Eastern traditions. I am very sympathetic to this idea of a life force that pervades all things. However, I have to say, I still have my misgivings. I'll always have my misgivings about things like this, because even if this is a diffuse force, you're still reducing the particularity of persons in the world to this thing. It is a very, very complicated topic though, and I'm not sure I've quite grasped what Karen is saying here, because she actually says in some passages that something like the Tao or the Qi still values the particularity of each individual thing. She'll talk about the Chinese concept of the 10,000 things, the Wan Wu, I think it is. A lot of what it comes down to is this kind of the individual qualities of each thing. But I always struggle with this defining, unifying force like the Qi or the Tao. It seems like semantics to me, like you don't necessarily need to have it at all, but maybe I'm misunderstanding. A lot of the book is really dedicated to how religion and ritual as well can help us regain a sense of connection with the earth. One of the things I found particularly interesting is that in the chapter The Holiness of Nature, she talks about the word holy meaning other. And for that reason, it's so other that we, as fallible beings, we cannot know for certain what this divine presence is. So we must accept that. That itself points towards humility and accepting our limitations. Another particular point that I found quite valuable in my kind of trajectory in seeing religion differently is that in one particular chapter, she talks about myths that really show that pain and sorrow are kind of embedded in a lot of traditions. And for me, that was important because my understanding in the past has really been that religion is all about, again, transcending the human, transcending the body, the earthly, and so forth, and denigrating our connection with the earth in favour of this blessed land of joy. But that's really not the case. There's a variety of examples to show that that isn't not the case. It's actually the idea of suffering is embedded in a lot of religious traditions, myths, and stories. And this, of course, helps us to appreciate that our world is broken or can be damaged with the ecological degradation that is constantly occurring. And on that point, I've actually tended to see modernity, kind of solipsistic, hyper individualistic modernity without religion as actually being more harmful than religion itself for all the points that Karen argues in the book. And on that point about modernity being kind of self-obsessed, we live in the human age, the Anthropocene, where everything seemingly revolves around us. There's a particular chapter that I found very valuable on the notion of kenosis, the emptying of the self, and it's really, again, it's about how religious traditions always point toward that true spirituality is about humility and compassion. It's about emptying the self, not so much that the self dissolves away, that the ego death, because of course we can only always be ourselves. It's particularly important for the relational qualities of enchantment. But that aside, we fundamentally need to become less self-obsessed, more aware of other beings, and to do that we need to effect an emptying of ourselves from our arrogance and our pride, and this book points toward that repeatedly. Of course, this ties into the Confucian idea, the related Confucian idea of the golden rule, of course, treating others as you would want to be treated yourself, and so forth. That idea pervades the book as well. Another section near the end of the book on the concept of ahimsa, which comes from the Indian spiritual traditions. This idea of harmlessness, not wantingly destroying the littlest creature just because you can, because it might be a nuisance, rather. In particular, I found moving the account of the Jains, how they would almost stand still to avoid harming even a blade of grass, because it might be a bit extreme, but the core idea there, the fragility of each thing. And again, I think I've always been more sympathetic than I've actually realised, because surely these traditions have so much value. Surely these are better, even if they are attached to religious conflict and ideas about the transcendent that can sometimes look away from the earth. These core practical, ethical teachings are so important in a world in which we are self-obsessed and think that we dominate and rule. We don't. Karen Armstrong, Sacred Nature. Till next time, everyone. Thanks for watching.